So just want to say a really big thank you all to you joining. A huge thank you to Claire Hill, who's joining us from Hill HR, and to Kevin Borum from Fast Start Solutions, and Gwion Humphreys, who is First Aid. So thank you so much for giving up your time today, and I hope you get a lot from the meeting. So I'm going to hand across to Claire, who is going to start and have a chat to you about HR really, and some of the things you need to be thinking about around potentially trying to unfurlough staff, but also I suppose just thinking forwards that unfortunately it might be an issue of not necessarily taking on all the staff that you had previously. So Claire will just really cover off some of those issues. Okay, so if I can hand across to Claire.
Right, I'm going to take your screen. That's okay. Right, can everybody see that? I'm hoping everybody can, because everybody's muted, so I can't see if they can, but I'm assuming everybody can see that. So good morning, everybody. So my name's Claire Hill. My business is Hill HR Consultancy, based in Worcestershire, and we support small businesses that don't need in-house HR, that don't have regular issues and just want to have occasional external HR support. So what I'm going to speak to you about today is preparing for the end of furlough, or the end of this whole lockdown situation, and starting to bring your staff back to work. The government is obviously preparing and will be announcing a plan for bringing the country out of the lockdown and maybe easing the restrictions a bit. And along with that, a lot of businesses are going to start asking staff to come back to work or changing the way they work. So just as there were considerations about who and how to furlough, there is no doubt going to be considerations about how to unfurlough, if that is such a word, but I'll be using that nevertheless. So what I'm going to look at today is I'm going to go through what to think about when recalling staff from furlough. If there's any staff reluctance to return to work, and that might be from either furlough or any other type of leave that they're currently on. I'm going to look at short time working and how to change staff's hours. And then I'm going to look at layoff and redundancies. So starting with recalling from furlough. So there's no doubt that there's going to be some resistance from staff to come back. And that could be because staff are genuinely nervous about coming back to work, that they're going to catch coronavirus. It could be staff who have got ongoing caring responsibilities, especially if they are recalled back to work before schools go back. And it could be staff that are genuinely just enjoying furlough on 80% of their pay and don't really want to come back to work. So furloughing is a new concept that was introduced in March. We hadn't heard of it before in this country. And unfortunately, there's no helpful manual to be able to do all this. So in essence, we're going to unfurlough really as a reverse to laying people off. And that's the kind of principles that we're going to adopt. And employers are going to furlough for one of various reasons. They might bring back recall from furlough because they are reopening their sites of work. They're going to go back to full trading and they want all staff to return to work. They might recall from furlough because they're going to be back to partial trading, but only want some staff back to work. And that's going to take a bit more preparing or planning. They might unfurlough staff, recall them back to work, but allow them to work from home. Or they might be unfurloughing staff and recalling them because it's the end of the coronavirus job retention scheme, which at the moment, as we know, is planned for the end of June. So just to have a look at the criteria for recalling staff back to work. And it's going to be a kind of a similar process to how you decided who to put onto furlough in the first instance. So some of the things you might look at is you might look at the roles and the skills of those that you need back in the business to do the work that's coming into the business. Now that might be all staff, which will be easier, or it might be only those staff that you need to provide the critical skills that you have. So you might have orders coming in and you want those that are critical to running or providing the work coming in. You might do it on the length of furlough. So for staff that have currently been on furlough for less than 3 weeks, you might decide not to bring those back in, because if you do, you can't claim the government grant. So you'll leave those off and you'll just bring those back in that have been off on furlough for 3 weeks, and therefore you've been able to claim the grant for them. You might do it on a first on furlough, first back. So those who've been on furlough the longest, you bring back the first, and that you'll do it in that way. You might do it in a rotating furlough. So you might start bringing those back off furlough that have been on it, but you might want to rotate that with staff that aren't yet on furlough, so that it feels fair to everybody, that everybody's had their chance of having some furlough and they've had their chance at being at work. You might ask for volunteers. If you're not worried about the skills and the roles, you might ask volunteers to come back. And if you have too many volunteers, then how can you decide? Well, you could just put names in a hat if it really doesn't matter who comes back, and it'll literally be done by that. However you do it, you want to obviously if you're going to make deliberate selections, obviously avoid any type of discrimination criteria. So don't recall all the men and leave all the women at home, or recall all the under 70s and leave all the over 70s unless they've got health conditions. So avoid any deliberate discriminatory basis. And however you do that, have a clear plan and communicate that to your staff. That's going to be really important, so they understand exactly how you are selecting staff to come back to work from furlough. So the actual process for recalling staff back to work, well, it might hopefully that in your furlough agreements in the first place, you might have put something in them such as we have the right to recall you back from furlough on the earliest of certain events. And those certain events might be, we've got work coming in, or the government have ended the scheme, or something like that. So hopefully it'll say that. And hopefully also in your ongoing communications with your staff during furlough, you might have given them the heads up that actually we might be planning this, so they know that this is not going to come as a surprise to them. So you contact individuals and just tell them that you are planning to recall them back to work from furlough. Advise them the date you're going to do that. Now, the guidance doesn't give you any set notice that you have to give them, so you don't have to give them any notice, but I would suggest that you give them a reasonable amount of notice. So I would say 48 hours is a reasonable amount. So you might tell them on the Friday that you'll be recalling them on the Monday, just so that they can make any plans in that time for whatever it is that they need. Now, and then I would confirm that in writing to them, setting out the arrangements for what you're going to do. And we're going to hear from two other speakers later that are going to talk about health and safety. But you might want to set out in the letter how you intend to call them back, reassure them that there's going to be safety at the workplace and how you're going to deal with that, and any arrangements for them so they need to arrive at certain times. I think we're going to hear the government are going to put in place, when they start easing the lockdown, some requirement for alternating shift working and shift patterns, that too many people aren't in the business at the same time. So if they do that, obviously you're going to have to set out maybe starting times and finishing times for your staff. So I'm trying to catch up with myself. When you're doing this, you're going to have to be prepared to respond to challenges and queries that you're going to get from your staff. And there's no doubt you're going to get some. So those that have got things like caring responsibilities, schools, they might have a child at school that nobody else can look after until schools go back. You might have workers that have letters from the NHS saying they're required to shield for 12 weeks and they still need to do that. You might have challenges from employees that are shielding with other people that need to shield, or you might have workers that have symptoms that need to be in isolation, or actually have the coronavirus and need to be in isolation. So you are going to have to deal with queries when you start asking staff to come back to work. And I would suggest that you ask staff to put those queries in writing, why they feel they can't come back to work, and then take an individual view on each of those queries from each of the members of staff. Remember, it is completely at your discretion who to furlough in the first place, and it's therefore completely at your discretion who to recall back to work. But explore with them why they're unable or unwilling to return to work, what the issues are, and how you can help them. So you're bound to have some reluctance to return to work from staff. And some of those reluctance might be they are simply scared to return to work. They've been in their sanctuary of their home, shielding, self-isolating and social distancing, and they're actually genuinely scared to come back into the workplace. And if that's the case, it's really going to be really important to reassure them what you're putting into place to make the workplace as safe as possible, subject to any of the guidance that we're going to get out from the government. So I'm not going to steal the thunder of the other speakers, because I know they're going to cover some of these things. But some of the things that you might be looking at are going to be introducing temperature checks, which could be asked by the government, providing PPE, fixing screens to workstations, additional breaks for hand washing, and additional cleaning of the premises. And I think we're going to hear some of those in more detail. So I'll leave it at that in terms of that. So establish their reasons and give them reassurance of what you're putting into place, and put the safe measures into place in the workplace, as you're going to hear. So what are your options if they absolutely refuse to return to the workplace? And it's no doubt that you are going to face this scenario where, despite all your best efforts to reassure workers, they are simply going to want to refuse. They may not even respond to your communications. So when you make phone calls or you leave messages, or however you decided to keep in touch when you put them on furlough, they may actually ignore your communication. So without good reason to refuse, what are your options? Well, it's going to leave you in a really difficult position on whether to decide whether to force the workers back to work under the threat of disciplinary action, or whether to relent and to leave them on furlough whilst this exists. Perhaps there's going to be an outcry from your other workers who said, well, we return, so why shouldn't they return? So again, you're going to have to take each individual view on each individual issue and decide how to deal with it. Just as we faced when we furloughed staff, we have been given very strong indications that we should be very careful about disciplining staff in this situation. And we should be very careful about dismissing staff in this situation. So it does somewhat tie your hands when you're dealing with disciplinaries on how robust you can deal with them. And some of the things I'd be looking at is how reasonable is the employee being, or how difficult are they being when you're trying to get them back to work? What steps have you taken as the employer to reassure them and get them back to work? Are they genuinely AWOL? In that case, obviously, so they're not responding to you at all. Or are they genuinely sick? In that case, you'll be dealing with them in a different way. Where workers are refusing to come back on health and safety grounds, and they have a fairly good argument about their health and safety grounds, you need to be really careful, because they're protected under the Health and Safety at Work Act, and therefore, and also you've obviously got whistleblowing as well. So you just need to be really careful about how to deal with any concerns that they've got, and listen to them and talk to them. So that's unfurloughing staff. What I'm going to do now is move on to some other things that you're going to have to consider when bringing staff back to work. This is more when furlough no longer exists. So at the end of June, potentially we're going to lose furlough as something we can claim, and assuming there's no extension to furlough, and assuming the government don't put in any different type of furlough arrangement, i.e. 50% furlough, 50% back at work, this is the kind of things you're going to have to consider. So first of all, we're going to be looking at short time working, and this might have been something you introduced before furlough became a concept. So when you first started to notice that work was diminishing and that you needed to start laying staff off or changing the way staff worked, you might have used short-time working. And short-time working is where you ask staff to work less than 50% of their working hours. So in effect, you have to vary their contracts of employment, say that for 50% or less than 50%, they're going to stay off, and 50% they're going to come to work. Now, where you've got a clause in your contract, and we call them lost clauses, which is layoff or short-time working clauses, you can actually consult with staff and you can invoke that contractual clause. And that clause will say something like, in your contracts of employment, we reserve the right to lay you off or invoke short-time working where we need to. Now, unfortunately, lost clauses are not common now in contracts of employment. They were in the 70s, where we had quite a lot of industrial action, but they are not overly common now. So where you've got the clause in your contract, you're very lucky, and you will be able to use that clause for both short-time working and for layoff. However, where you don't have that clause in your contract, you're going to have to consult with your staff, and you're going to have to seek their agreement to put them on short-time working. And as well as short-time working, they're obviously going to get reduced pay. So less than 50% working hours, less than 50% pay. And that's going to be quite a big thing to ask your staff, because at the moment they've probably been sitting on furlough on 80% of their pay, doing nothing, sitting at home. And then you're going to be saying to them, now we want you to come in and we want you to work for 50% of your hours on 50% of your pay. And of course they're going to say, but why would we agree to do that? Well, they're going to have various choices. Furlough will have ended, so there will not be any of this 80% of pay. And therefore their choice is either they're going to accept this, or potentially you're going to have to completely lay them off and make them redundant. So it's really going to be their choice on what they choose to do and whether they want to keep their job, I suppose, at the end of the day. You might equally want to look at changing their working hours. And this again is going to have to be something that you're going to have to consult with your staff. Now, all staff are contractually entitled to return from furlough on the same terms and conditions that they left. However, you might be able to consult with your staff and seek staff consent to change their working hours. This could be on a permanent or temporary basis, and it will form a permanent or temporary variation to their contract of hours and pay. And again, when you explain to staff that the alternative to them not agreeing to change their working hours potentially could be either redundancy, or it could be that you can't run your business, therefore there will be no business, then staff hopefully will accept that they're going to have to change their working hours either on a short period or on a permanent basis. We're in a really difficult time, and therefore it's going to be asking really difficult things of your staff. And you might be surprised, some staff will completely understand because we're all in this together, and therefore will accept and hopefully agree to the change of their working hours. And including in working hours might be working days as well. And if they don't, then you're going to have to make some quite difficult and heartbreaking decisions about where to go forwards with that. Layoffs. We saw layoffs before furlough, and furlough was brought in to try and avoid redundancies and layoffs. But once the furlough scheme ends, we're going to be back to where we were before March, before the furlough scheme was announced, and we're going to be potentially thinking about using layoffs again. So what is layoff? Well, layoff is a position where you ask staff not to come to work. You don't pay them, but they continue to be employed by you. So the employment continues, but you're not providing them work and you're not paying them. And again, you do need contractual consent to do this. Again, if there's a layoff clause in your contract, then you will be invoking that. And that's great because although you should still consult with your staff, you don't really need to get their agreement. You consult with them to tell them this is what you're doing, but you don't actually have to get their consent to doing it because you've already got it in their contract. Where you don't have it in their contract, like short-time working, you're going to have to seek their agreement to do it. You will not pay them. However, they are entitled to seek a statutory guarantee payment, which is £30 a day, and they can have that 5 times. So you may decide to lay off and bring back to work intermittently. So they can get their £30 a day for the days that they are completely laid off. So that's the days where they have complete no work. And you may decide to bring them back for a day and then lay them off again. Or you may have to lay them off continuously. Where you lay them off continuously for a 4-week period, or you lay them off for 6 weeks continuously in a 13-week period, they do have the right to claim redundancy and claim redundancy payment. And therefore, you would, unless you challenge or you give them a counter notice, which I'll explain what that is, then you would have to agree to making them redundant and make them a redundancy pay. Now, a counter notice is where if they would say to you, I want redundancy because I've been off for 4 weeks now, the counter notice would be you saying, I'll bring you back to work then. And then if you bring them back to work, then they're not entitled to redundancy pay because you've broken their layoff. So that's something that's available to you as well. You might be looking at redundancies and restructuring, unfortunately, as well. This is going to be, unfortunately, now I've stopped doing so much layoff, I am unfortunately doing a lot of redundancies, and it's going to be the sad fact of where we go now. And this might be because your business is going to significantly change when you come back after this lockdown period, and you no longer need the number of in the workforce that you needed previously because you haven't got the work. Or it may be because you've taken the opportunity during lockdown or during your company being unable to trade, that actually you've looked at the structure of your business and decided it wasn't the best structure, it wasn't cost effective, and you might want to restructure on that basis. So for whatever reason, you might be looking at redundancies. Redundancies occurs when either your business is closing completely, or maybe you're moving location and you're moving so far away your employees don't want to travel with you. It might occur because you are restructuring and you no longer have the need for the role or roles that you've got in the business, and therefore you want to completely remove the role from your business. Or you're going to reduce your headcount, therefore you need fewer people to carry out the work. So you might have 5 engineers and you no longer need 5, you only need 2, and therefore you're going to reduce that number of people that you've got in your business or doing that role. However you're going to do it, you must consult with your staff and carry out the consultation process. It's a statutory consultation process. It's laid down in law, and you must carry that out. If you don't, with staff with more than 2 years service, the redundancies will be automatically deemed unfair. So it'll be an unfair dismissal, as well as anything else that the employer might throw at you, like discrimination. So you must consult with staff. You must go through that process before you make any redundancies. For staff that are less than 2 years service, they don't actually have unfair dismissal rights. They have discrimination rights, so please don't think that any dismissals you make with staff that less than 2 years service will be fine. You'll get away with it because they don't have any rights. They have discrimination rights, but what they don't have is unfair dismissal rights, which means if you don't follow a redundancy process to the letter, or any other process come to that they can't take you to tribunal for unfair dismissal. But I still think from a moral and from what your staff deserve, at least have a conversation and go and explain to them why you're having to make them redundant, and have that conversation with them, because I think that's just the kind thing to do anyway. Another option available to you is something you may have used before furlough was announced, is you may have offered paid or unpaid leave. And this is something you can offer to employees again afterwards. If staff have got holiday left to use, it's something you can offer. You can also, with paid holiday, enforce holiday as well. And so if you're going to do that, if you're going to decide to use their paid holiday, please ensure that you give them the correct notice. So it's twice the amount of notice as the leave that you want them to take. So if you want your staff to take a week's holiday out of their entitlement, you must give them 2 weeks notice of that. That's really important. You can also offer for them to take unpaid leave. Again, the employment continues throughout both of those in exactly the same way as it does in layoff. And whatever you put into place, ensure that you just confirm it in writing. So there can be no challenges and there can be no confusion at a later date about that. So if they're asking for unpaid leave and you're going to accept that, make sure that they ask for that in writing and you confirm that in writing, so they can't challenge you anywhere down the line. And that goes really with everything in employment, really. Get everything in writing. And the one thing I just want to finish with is I just want to reiterate that these might be unprecedented times and really difficult and challenging times, but please remember that employment law still applies. Okay, you still, as difficult as this may be and as difficult as the decisions are that you have got to make about your business and what to do with your staff, employment law still applies and you must still adhere to it. And I've no doubt that we are going to see a raft of employment tribunals when this is all over, having to deal with some of the things, the treatments that employers have made. So please remember that whatever you do, that employment law still applies. I'm not sure if we're going to be taking questions now, Sam, or whether we're going to be doing something. I think you're going to confirm how questions are going to be put across. Yeah.
I'm sure that probably you've all got lots of questions. So Claire, I was going to ask you, so if you've got some sort of general questions that Claire can take a look at, if you can type them into the chat box. And I was going to say at the end of this as well, it might be a good idea for everybody to save the chat. But Claire, also, can you put your details into the chat box, please? And then if people have got specific questions or they need your help, then they've got contact details to come back to you with those.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, if anybody wants to put anything in chat that's general question or anything afterwards that you want to ask, which is general, that's fine. If you want to make a specific or ask a specific question about a situation in your business, obviously, please don't put that in chat. But please, you can contact me at a later date and I'd be happy to talk it through with you more confidentially off air.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Claire.
That's okay. So that's is that okay? Are we back to
I think so. Yeah, there we go. That was brilliant. Thank you so much. I hope you all found that really useful. Like I said, please do use the chat box and please do contact Claire if you need any help. She'll see if she can answer the questions, any questions that you do put to her. Which now brings me on then to Kevin. So Kevin runs a company called Fast Solutions. I'm sure he'll tell you just a little bit about them. And they are a health and safety company based in Pershore. So let me just find Kevin on here and I can unmute Kevin. There we go. Kevin, I think you should be unmuted now.
Good morning, everyone. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. I hope you can all hear me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought I'd do this a bit more informally, as I like to normally do it. I do have some notes, though. I'm willing to share those notes with you later if necessary. One of the things about health and safety is most people don't really take any notice of it. It's known as a hygiene factor. You don't notice it until it's not there. And the one thing that COVID has done is highlight the fact that there are certain health and safety issues that aren't in place, that nobody's taken any notice of. So when employees are going to be coming back from work or back to work, what they need to do is feel confident that the companies have or are doing everything possible to keep them safe. to prevent the spread of infection. A lack of confidence in your employer will result in higher cases of absence, as Claire has just pointed out. People are going to be reluctant to come back. So companies have to have the welfare of their employees in mind at all times. And it's with some of these things that I'm going to try and cover very, very quickly. This is all a very short chat for you all. Legally, COVID-19 comes under a communicable disease under health and safety law, which means it falls under the requirements of RIDDOR. And the HSC website says you must make a report under RIDDOR, that's the reporting of injuries, dangerous occurrences, regulations 2013, when a worker has been diagnosed as having COVID-19 and there's reasonable evidence that it was caused by exposure at work. Okay, and that's important. If there's evidence it was caused by exposure at work, it must be reported, end of. So that will go on the nice health and safety file that they keep on your company, the HSE. One of the things that we can do to try and stop this, and I always come back to this, risk assessment. Okay, risk assess your premises, risk assess your people, define what they're doing, where they're doing it, and how they're doing it. Your premises. There are places where social distancing may not or cannot be maintained. In my own office, our desks are set far enough apart that we don't have to worry about being on top of each other. I have 2 desks that are face to face, but when people are sitting at these, they're 2 meters apart. Plus there's a screen down the middle, fabric screen. So there's no way they can infect each other by being in close proximity. But there's things I need to think about. Toilets, for instance. Everybody's using the same toilets. The kitchens. Everybody's using the same kitchens. All these places are where disease can spread. And there's also shared facilities and shared equipment. Printers, for instance. Everybody's going to be sticking their fingers over the printers. So hygiene is really, really important. So when you're doing your risk assessment, think about how people are getting in, where they're going to be, how they're going to get out, and where they're going to come together. Now, most staff, they'll gather in groups around the coffee machine to have a chat. You've got to try and avoid all this. You've got to stamp down on it fairly quickly. Okay? So all this needs to be put into your risk assessment. Where can it go wrong, basically, is the first step. Then you need to find out who's going to be impacted. Okay? There are those that are shielded. They're not going to come back to work very soon, as we already know. But there are those that are at higher risk. Myself, for instance, I have asthma. I have a single kidney. So I have several things that could be an issue. I'm in the older workforce now, 60, so I come into this higher category. So I have to do everything I can to keep myself safe away from my younger staff members. Then there's those that have to work in teams. Scaffolders, for instance, they can't work alone. They usually work in teams. How do you separate them? Mobile workers. What do you do about mobile workers? If you have construction, you can't have people going to site in the same van. Plumbers can't go, they have to be going in single vehicles. Sales reps, single vehicles. We're risk assessors, so we go to sites, we go into companies, we go into buildings. I have to send out people in a single vehicle. But when they're there, then they have all the issues of coming into contact with people and objects they don't know. So I have to provide the correct PPE in that instance. So who's impacted and how will they be impacted is the second part of your risk assessment. And you need to do all this in association with your staff member. You need to keep talking to them in consultation at all times. Control measures. This is where those physical and managerial things that you can put in place to try and reduce the spread of disease. As I said, I have screens on our desks, so people are not directly facing each other. I don't have people sitting side by side. Some companies, their desks aren't wide enough to maintain that 2 meters between them. It's okay having a screen at the side of your desk, but you don't sit inside your desk, most people. They always sit at the side of it. So if someone's beside them, there's no screen between them. Putting screens up makes it very unsociable. What's the point? You might as well be working from home. During your risk assessment, some of the control measures you can put in place is ensure that each workstation, where each individual works, has their own sanitizers, boxes of tissues and things like that, so they don't have to go to communal areas to grab these things and so on and so forth. Yeah? So that the bottle of hand sanitizer that sits on their desk is only ever used by them. Nobody else is going to spread germs onto that. It's their own fault if they catch germs off their own bottle. So it's silly things, and they sound like the minutiae, but it's the minutiae that actually is the problem. The big things that everyone's talking about on the news, everybody knows about. Mobile workers, we need to try and restrict travel where possible. But we cannot, at this moment in time, stay out overnight. So if we go out to site and we're travelling down to London or Kent or whatever, it just becomes a very long day. We need to take this into account with regards to working hours. As our nice HR person will tell you, you can't get them to work extortionate hours just to get the job done. You know, I can't put them in a hotel when hotels are open. So that's the issue I have there. Again, it's that one person per vehicle. And again, provide the same safety equipment and so on in the vehicle as you would at a workstation. Provide the sanitizers for them to use, provide tissues and waste containers. My waste containers have bags in, nobody has to touch the waste. They just pick the bag up and it's all thrown away in one go. Reoccupation of premises is a big one as well. They should be safety checked before staff return. For instance, are all the fire safety systems and equipment in working order? Have they been tested? Are the fire extinguishers, etc., still pressurized and so on? Yeah. All these things need to be in place before people come back. Legionella. Have you under taps in the offices or the workplace? Have you flushed the loos? Anywhere where water may become an aerosol can be breathed in, and it may cause Legionella if it's been sitting there, especially with the way the weather's been going, hot and cold. It's ideal breeding ground for Legionella. Is all your equipment in good order? Let's talk about mobile workers. Yep, come back to work, you know, you're out on the road, jump in your car, you find your tyres are down, your brakes are binding, etc., because the car's sat there for the last 6 weeks or whatever. Yeah. All needs to be checked, all needs to be maintained and made safe before anyone does anything. Clean the workplace beforehand. Now, you could get the cleaners in, but then you're putting them at risk as well. So, but it's still recommended that we clean the workplace down before anyone comes in. And have all the hygiene and cleaning materials, etc., in place before anyone comes back. And no one's got to go hunting for anything. The less time people interact with the stuff they don't have to, the easier it is to control any spread of disease. And the last thing I would like to say is manual control. Employers may be deemed negligent if a worker catches and later dies from COVID-19. Okay? Under health and safety law, end of. You may be deemed negligent if they can find any fault to say that you didn't do what was reasonably required to keep these people safe. There is going to be some lawyer out there who's going to take this case, and they will eventually win one. Okay? This is where management controls come into it. And I wouldn't say you need to bully, but you need to be robust in your approach to these. Enforce the social distancing in the office. Don't let people gather in groups. Provide the PPE. Make sure they know how to wear it. Because I've been in a case where we provided gloves to a certain person, and a bit like the O.J. Simpson, an incident happened and they went to court. They stood up and said, nobody trained me on how to put the gloves on. So they won their case. So provide the PPE, make sure they know how to wear it, and enforce them in wearing it. PPE masks, those that are definitely classed as PPE, should be fit tested. Okay. However, trying to find someone to fit test a mask at this moment in time is going to be near enough impossible. However, they should be fit for purpose, and they should be close fitting to prevent anything getting in or out. And that's the best you can do at this moment in time. Face coverings are a different thing because they're not defined as PPE under health and safety law. And the last thing, the very last thing I want to talk about is tell staff they must not come to work if they show symptoms. It seems very straightforward and basic. These are the most important things to provide confidence to your staff. If they feel involved and they think you're doing everything you possibly can, they're more likely to come back to work and be happy to do it. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Kevin. Again, Kevin, can you pop your details in the chat box, please? So that if anybody's got any questions, that they've got your details afterwards. And again, if you've got any questions, please just, if they're sort of general ones, just pop them in the chat box, and Kevin will see if he can respond to those. There was a little bit of chat going on that I saw. So Claire is going to send out, she's going to let me have a slide. So I'll get the slides across to you all together with some guidance as well, so that you've got that information should you need it. So finally, Gwion, hopefully you are there.
Good morning.
Morning, right, okay, so I'm now going to hand across to Gwion, who's going to have a chat to us about the changes in first aid.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're doing well and keeping healthy and safe. I'm just going to I'm going to try not to talk to death, and certain things that Kev has already covered far better than I can. I might also touch on those again. So apologies if there's things I'm saying that you already know, but I want to go from the ground up to make sure everyone is on the same page and everyone knows what's going on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the virus. Apologies, I will be reading some of this. I haven't learned all yet. I'm going to look at the employer's responsibility and extra measures in the workplace in terms of hygiene, and also PPE, hand washing, changes to the CPR protocol, which is the biggest change for adults. I'm also going to mention that for children, even if it doesn't affect a workplace, I think it's nice to have that in your back pocket. I'd like to quote my sources as well. I've been looking at the World Health Organization website, watching their media briefs 3 times a week. Well worth doing, by the way. Also the UK and European Resuscitation Councils and the HSE. So I've been looking at all their guidelines. That's where I've been taking my information from. Please don't take too much notice of what you see on the media. Please go straight to the horse's mouth for these things, just because there's too much spin. Definitely don't listen to the American media, because they're full of interesting stuff. The information I've got right now is current for the current level of knowledge. The research into COVID-19 is ongoing, so this may change in the future, but right now it is current. What we do know is that COVID-19 travels from person to person through respiratory droplets and contact. Respiratory droplets are something we all breathe out all the time. Yeah, it's always happening, little microscopic droplets. And when we're close enough to someone else, we also breathe in the things they've already breathed out. Yeah, that sounds minging, but that's just the way it is. Now, these droplets, under force of gravity, will eventually fall to the ground or to a surface, which is why we've got 2 meters as a social distance. That's why that was decided. So the droplets have got time to fall before someone else breathes them in. Under normal breathing, it doesn't go very far. Obviously, if someone's coughing or sneezing, breathing heavily, or sudden breathing, they go a lot further. And that's another thing to think about. Also, we can absorb these droplets through our eyes. That's why the NHS have the face shield to help them. So then contact is, and this is where coronavirus is far more dangerous than other viruses, because it can last for a long time in the open air on a surface. Now, there are several bits of research out there. Some have got 3 days, some have got up to 10 days. That's a long, long time for a virus to live in the open air. The reason that it can do it, it's got a lot of fat cells in the membrane of the virus. So those fat cells seal it in and give it somewhere, well, comfortable and safe to live. And not even sunlight, UV light kills it. Heat and cold doesn't kill it. So waiting for the winter to kill it off, or waiting for the heat of summer to kill it off, it's not going to happen. Yeah, this thing is very, very difficult to kill. That's why it's everywhere. Now, in terms of contact with surface contact and the issues with that, the nice thing is it's such a simple thing to sort out. Soap and water. Soap is a degreaser. It breaks down the fat cells in the membrane of the virus, and then that membrane destroys itself and the virus becomes inactive. That's why hand washing is so important. So when it comes to workplaces, obviously, and Kev's already mentioned, communal areas, toilets, kitchens, all the rest of it, something that it's going to be very difficult to have cleaners come in so regularly, or as regularly as you need, and as Kev said, it puts them at risk. So possibly have something in these areas that people can use themselves. So they can use it before and after they go in. So if you've got a toilet, for example, a spray and some paper of some description, spray it down, clean it, use it, do the same when you leave. Everyone does that. Not only will the place clean itself, it'll minimize that sort of passing on. One good thing about COVID-19 is not bloodborne. The chances of catching it from someone else's blood is virtually zero. You'll be catching it off their skin if you catch it. So in terms of first aid, if someone is coming to you with a bleeding injury, you would then you'd have the same as you normally would. You'd have your gloves on and deal them very, very carefully. The proximity, when you're in first aid, the proximity to doing someone else is the thing that's the biggest issue. So when it comes to PPE, then we need to, if you can provide it, you should provide it, at least to your first aiders. Yeah, so it can't be killed by heat, cold, or UV light. And interestingly enough, not by bleach, Mr. Trump. Don't hear that. So there are a lot of my sources and a lot of stuff I'm talking about. I've got a load of notes that I've made. Sorry that I'm reading them, but again, I can make these available at the end, or again, you can email me if there's anything that you want to ask. Kev's already outlined how much is the employer's responsibility. So I'm actually going to miss that whole section out now because he's done it, which is brilliant. But you are genuinely, you have major responsibilities to our employees. 3 areas in particular that I just want to briefly talk about, though, is contact hygiene. So again, surfaces like desks, tables, objects that people touch, phones, laptops, keyboards, anything that people touch, they need to be wiped down on a regular basis. Again, if you give the stuff to the individual and say, make this part of your day, it might make it easier. Promote regular and thorough hand washing. Please don't don't think that everyone knows how to wash their hands properly. The majority of people will just do this and dry their hands and think it's done. They'll have ignored most of it. So this is something else that might be worth highlighting as a brief, or as people come back. There's loads of videos online that you can use saying, look, this is how you wash your hands properly. I think personally it's worth doing for the sake of a 30-second video. There are lots and lots of posters and graphics that if you go to the World Health Organization website, you can download them, print them, and put them up, that can encourage people to do things, remind people to do these things. Respiratory hygiene, try and promote good respiratory and hygiene in work. Normal breathing, air doesn't go very far. Cough and sneeze, it circulates the room very, very quickly. So encourage people, have tissues, or as Kev said, people bring their own, cough or sneeze into them, then they need to go into a bin. And this bin needs to have a lid, because believe it or not, what is in there now is a biohazard. Get a bin with a lid, because otherwise, those things will continue to circulate. From my own point of view, although it's not actually any of the guidelines, I would also consider marking that waste then as hazardous waste, and see if you can find a way to get rid of it as hazardous waste. I don't know what the council does in this local area, but again, worth looking at. And just to reiterate something that Kev has said, really, really important, tell people to stay home. If the temperature is higher than 37.3 is the guideline, so if they've got a temperature higher than 37.3, they've got a mild cough or a low-grade fever, stay at home or work from home if they can. Similarly, if they are taking any kind of medication like, I've got a list, paracetamol, ibuprofen, aspirin, on a regular basis for something else, that can mask the symptoms of COVID-19. So again, they should stay at home until they know that they haven't got the symptoms. I know that's going to be really difficult for a lot of employers. It's going to cause a lot of problems, but it's better to have someone stay at home than bring it into the workplace to spread it around, I think. And then communicating all this stuff, you can do it through obviously the training, intranet, posters and stuff you can put up, all different ways you can do it. Okay, your guidance in terms of first aid cover doesn't change when you go back to work. You'll still need first aiders. One major thing to consider is who your first aiders are. Do they sit in an at-risk category? If so, they cannot be first aiders. Okay, so it's important to consider who your first aiders are. You still need first aid cover. Something that to know that if someone's got a certificate that has run out, so either a first aid at work or an emergency first aid at work certificate, if it is run out on or after the 16th of March this year, they have a 3-month extension before they have to requalify. So if you've got first aiders whose qualifications run out, you have a 3-month extension before they have to do another course, and that again may be extended later on. PPE for your first aiders, gloves at the very least, face mask if you can get it to them, and eye protection as well. Even if that's, even if that's just safety glasses, it's to protect against those airborne droplets getting into the eye being absorbed that way. Anywhere that PPE is issued and used, guidance and training must be given onto in its correct use, as Kev said, but also in its correct removal, disposal, and decontamination afterwards. Again, there's plenty of guidance on the WHO website, HSE. Again, if not, ping me a message. I can help you with this, because a lot of people are thinking, well, I've got gloves on, therefore I'm fine. But they take the gloves off and then they contaminate themselves in the process of doing it. So taking things off and disposing them correctly is really, really important. I'm going to read most of this just because I can't remember all the stats, I'm honest. Something really important to remember, that 80% of people who get diagnosed with COVID-19 will recover without needing hospital treatment. It's in the news and people, and it's not good that the mortality rate is so high, but please, it's important to remember the majority of people will not get badly affected by it. There's been 3.5 million reported infection cases around the world and 250,000 deaths, and we're far, far from the end of this. So anything an employer does in a workplace to minimize the spread is incredibly important. Well, otherwise what will happen is we'll end up having another surge and another lockdown. Another surge and another lockdown, and that's how the process will go. And no business is going to survive very well in that. So the more an employer can do to contain, then it's just better for everyone. It makes more sense, in my opinion. Okay, I've talked about hand washing. Oh, hand sanitizer, by the way, it's a good second, but it's not as good as hand washing. Hand sanitizer depends on the alcohol content to destroy the membrane. It's not as effective as just ordinary soap. So if you've got that, use that, please. One thing I think that you should consider for your first aiders, possibly for everybody else, they need to be carrying their PPE on them. Having it in the first aid kit probably isn't going to be enough. To be honest, I've never thought it's enough. I've always thought first aiders should have a minimum on them. Yeah, because for people who've been involved in first aid scenarios, they're always at the most difficult to reach places, miles from anywhere, miles from help. So have them carry the stuff on them for protection of themselves, but also if you've got a casualty that's bleeding badly, they need help now. Otherwise they bleed to death. If you've got someone who's unconscious and not breathing, sorry to be doom and gloom, I always look at the worst case scenario. If you've got someone who's unconscious and not breathing, they've got 3.5 minutes before their brain has had it. They may survive after that, but the brain will have gone. There'll be no quality of life there. So for them to have the equipment on them to start treatment straight away is really important. But it's also really important to stress to your first aiders that their own well-being and health comes before the casualties. And that can be a really difficult decision to make, but you've got to sort of stress that to them. Okay, I'm going to move you just for a second, if you don't mind. Hopefully this will work fairly quickly. Can you see my mannequin? You can, brilliant. Because I can't on my screen, but that's okay. As long as you can, that's fine. Now, if you are in the worst case scenario and have unconscious, not breathing casualty, the standard CPR protocol is to check for breathing. You are not going to put your face anywhere near your casualty if you suspect COVID-19. Personally, I would suspect everyone of COVID-19. So in order to check if they're breathing or not, the better way to do it is to place your hand on the diaphragm. So bottom of the chest, top of the stomach, the diaphragm here. If someone is breathing, that diaphragm, you'll feel movement in that diaphragm. Okay. There'll be other indicators as well, the colour and all the rest of the stuff. You might be able to tell other ways, but do not put your face near theirs to find out if they're breathing. Now, if you suspect someone is unconscious and not breathing, phone an ambulance straight away. Get help on the way. Make it clear to them that you suspect they have COVID-19. Okay, make it very clear. Now, the HSC and Research Council guidelines now say that we are not going to do breaths for our casualty. It is a good idea, and in fact, you need to put something over their mouth and nose. Now, bearing in mind this person's already unconscious and not breathing. Okay, so we're not going to do them any harm. The reason this is here, if you remember at the very beginning, I said the airborne stuff, if we breathe normally, it doesn't go very far. Now, if you do a compression on somebody, it's a violent movement. You're pushing their rib cage down very quickly. So the air that's coming out of their mouth is much faster than normal. It will go everywhere. It's not a safe environment for you or your bystanders now if this person has got COVID-19. So that's the reason you cover their mouth and nose with some kind of material that will stay on there. Yeah, plastic that blows off is no good. It needs to be like obviously tea towel just because it was cleaning in the kitchen. But you know, anything that's heavy enough to stay on needs to go on that face. And the guidelines state that you carry out CPR compressions only. Try and get a defibrillator if you can get hold of one. Get an ambulance on the way. Now, the truth is, if you're there for a while, the reason we do compressions is we're moving the blood around the body, and the residual oxygen then gets to the brain and other important organs, but mainly the brain to keep it alive. When we do those compressions, we move that blood around. What happens to that oxygen? Eventually it depletes, which is why we normally do breaths. And I'm not saying that you should not advocate that your first aiders do breaths, but some people will want to try, okay? I personally would not hesitate to do breaths on somebody if I knew it was what I had to do. So I would make sure that don't advocate that they use these, but have them available. Yeah, so you can have a pocket mask that will go over your casualty's nose and mouth for you to be able to carry your rescue breaths without coming into contact. Now, do not advocate to do this, but have these available, because if you're in this situation, it's a very difficult thing to wrestle with your own conscience, because if you're the person dealing with an unconscious, not breathing casualty, for your own mental well-being, you need to know that you've done everything possible to help that person. So although you need to advocate that they do not do rescue breaths, there's a good chance they might do them anyway. Okay, so because there's a chance they might do them anyway, make sure they've got the PPE to protect themselves. So you can use a pocket mask like that, or there is also, and you'll find these in many first aid kits, a face shield, which again simply goes over the casualty's face. Okay. Now, if you've been on, any of your first aiders been on one of my courses, they will all have one of these. Sorry to shamelessly brand at you, but they are a little keyring that everybody gets if they've been on my course that contains gloves and a face shield. Okay. Now I have these available. If you would like some, let me know. I will get them and I'll post them out to you. Okay. Now every first aid that comes on my courses get these, because again, when these go wrong, it's always the most crazy places. So I'm aware now that I'm taking too much of your time, but just before I hand you back to Sam, I would like to mention the worst case scenario that I hope nobody ever finds themselves in, an unconscious, not breathing child or baby. okay, because it's horrible, but it might happen. If a child or a baby is unconscious and not breathing, it's very, very, very unlikely to be cardiac arrest, a heart problem. They go into a respiratory arrest, which is a breathing problem. Now, with someone if you've got an adult in cardiac arrest, you can do CPR and get a defibrillator and zap them all day. Potentially, they might not come back. With a child or an infant who is not breathing and unconscious, because they're likely to be in respiratory arrest, by putting breaths in and doing compressions, their recovery rate is very, very high. By not doing the breaths for a child in respiratory arrest, they will die. So the guidelines, if you're in the horrible situation where you have to do CPR on a child or a baby, you do breaths and compressions as normal. So if I had a baby now, I would do 5 breaths initially, then I would do my 30 compressions and my 2 breaths as normal. Something I should have mentioned in my notes earlier, but I forgot. The rate of infection in children is very, very low. Very, very low. There's something circulating in the media saying that children are immune. They're not immune, not even close. But the majority of children, and when I say children, I mean people under 18, who get COVID-19 get mild symptoms and recover. And that is in the vast majority. Now, again, I was looking at WHO website for their stats, and the mortality rate in children is very, very low. Also, the instances of children infecting adults are very, very low, and the instances of adults infecting children are higher. So I'm not saying you can't catch it from a child, but it's far, far less likely, is the truth. Hopefully, I haven't scared you all crapless, because it's not a nice scenario to be in, but it is something to think about, because if you are in this worst case scenario and you've got potential COVID-19 to deal with, it's a lot for an individual to have on their shoulders. Again, I'm more than happy to sort of discuss this with individuals, give guidelines, or even talk to your staff or your first aiders if need be. I haven't missed anything, so I will now shut up. Thank you, Sam.
Oh, thank you very much, Gwion. I hope you've all found that useful. I know I've got quite a page of notes here, so I have recorded it. So if anybody wants the recording, please let me know. I can't say thank you enough to our speakers. Huge thanks to you guys for giving up your time and doing that.